Do you want to know what Geralt says after killing the professor in the Witcher books? Those evil men are dead. It may turn out that their comrades or cronies may ask what befell these evil men. Tell them the wolf bit them, the white wolf, and add they should keep glancing over their shoulders. One day, they'll look back and see the wolf. Do you want to know what he said in the TV show?
Vignusa!
This whole scene, in my opinion, is a perfect metaphor for this season. Alright, that might be a bit unfair and it might exaggerate how bad this season really is, because this intro is particularly horrible, and to be perfectly honest, the season is entirely acceptable. Sometimes it's actually really good, other times it's just bland, boring, and very cliche. This season seems like they took season 1 and then sieved out most of the mistakes. Well, frankly, season 1 wasn't that great to begin with, and it had its moments, but it was a very average TV show. And if I wasn't someone that read the Witcher books multiple times over, I wouldn't really be interested in it. And the same can be said about season 3. Every time a memorable scene appeared that I read in the books, I braced myself as my expectations were really poor. But honestly, this time around, they did deliver some pretty solid adaptations from the Time of Contempt. Seriously, I could predict the lines and events before they even happened, and in my opinion, that's a sign of a pretty good adaptation. But then the problem starts, as it has been doing, from the parts that are entirely the Netflix writer's own creation. But honestly, this time around, bad writing really isn't the main problem of the season. Although it's still very prevalent, the season is mostly how the show was produced. Let's dive into the specifics. What was good and what was bad. To start with what was good, thankfully this time around there was actually quite a lot. I love the first 15 minutes. I know I made fun of the intro in my own intro, and I'll get back to that in a bit. Aside from the rather odd interpretation of the Dear Friend letters, there was really not much to complain about the opening 15 minutes. It was lovely to see Yennefer and Ciri bond, and it was lovely to see Ciri and Geralt actually act like father and daughter. You know, initially I thought that Freya was a bit old compared to what Ciri would be in the books, and that it would be awkward for Henry to have that sort of chemistry with her, but honestly it works. Although Ciri's age is still a point of contention for me, and again, I'll get back to that. Overall, the whole opening sequence was beautiful, from the family dinners to the lessons and just the goofing around. There were more wholesome moments throughout the first episode as well, and the rest of the season. If you watched the other Witcher video I made, you know my biggest critique was the lack of chemistry between the three lead actors, and finally we're getting to see it. Another thing that I mentioned in the previous video was the lack of actually adapting the books, and finally they've started to do that. The messenger plot was done really well, and it was actually a perfect adaptation in my opinion. In the Time of Contempt, his part is all done in one chapter, and it travels from Ciri's and Yen's plots, showcases Ciri's powers, and then transfers to Geralt's plot. And finally it ends with Dijkstra's conspiracy and foreshadows the coup of Thanedd. In the show, it's spread out over multiple episodes and goes over everything the books does. The changes they made were exactly what they needed to make the story work in the TV series, and if they just translated it directly from the books, it would be a total mess in my opinion. So good job to the writers. I also enjoyed everything that happened in Gor's Velen. It was more or less the same as the books. I just don't understand who this character is. I have a feeling it could be Missel, a member of the Rats and Ciri's future love interest. Also, Cahir gets his storyline fleshed out, and honestly that was the highlight of the season for me. I know Regis is the fan favorite of Geralt's company, but for me, Cahir is definitely the best. I'm a huge fan of redemption arc characters, and being able to see Cahir in the same way I saw him in the books is great, and it finally does seem like he's headed back on track to where he would be in the books, as they really did make a lot of changes to his characters over season 1 and 2. Now, unfortunately, I do have to start addressing a lot of what they did wrong. There are more good points, by the way, because they actually attempted to adapt the series, but we do really need to address the type of storytelling they've been doing. Let's go back to the intro. The problem I had with it is that they're really cheapening the story, in my opinion, with these very almost cartoon or rather teen drama style of storytelling. They keep adding these slow motion effects to the fight scenes, and it really takes away from any seriousness, and it's just a cheap way of making the scene more badass. It just feels like it's straight out of a cheesy 90s action movie, and that's not really that good. I know it sounds like I'm being a bit pretentious, but if you compare this with another very popular dark fantasy TV series, such as Game of Thrones, can you really see a fight scene of Jon Snow playing out like this? And to be honest, with how the rest of the season went down, I could really see Yennefer or Ciri doing something like this from Netflix's other teen drama, Ginny and Georgia. And again, that's not good. I think this show would excel if they played out the deep intrigue and drama from the books without adding these cliché, stylistic and writing choices. For example, Dijkstra's entire plot in the series was just so cringeworthy. Vizimir's character was just hard to watch, and he didn't even seem like a real person. Especially didn't seem like a monarch. He acted almost as if he was a cartoon character. Dijkstra himself loses his wit and it isn't that impressive. Even worse, there was some very unnecessary kinky S&M shit going on with him and Philippa, and that's not really part of the book, so I don't know what the fuck was going on with that. I know everything surrounding Radovid and his romance with Dandelion was also a point of contention among all the fans. All I will say on it is this: I can see Dandelion being attracted to Radovid, but the way it was executed made it seem like the only reason Radovid is there is to allow Dandelion to be bisexual, and it just felt very contrived. This sort of teen drama contrived style of storytelling just made it seem like your average generic fantasy show. It feels like Netflix has done this in the past with very limited success, and just because they've done it in the past, I'm not sure why they're doing it now. Not because it hasn't worked before, but it takes away the unique identity of The Witcher. Why not let this show stand on its own and have its own identity? Which is actually why the books are so appealing, as typically the fantasy genre is very hard to make unique, and Andrzej Sapkowski managed to pull it off. This show, however, didn't. and it just feels generic. I mean, they even had a scene of a bad guy walking away from roaring flames, so it's not just generic for a fantasy series, it's generic and cliche for a TV series. And this happens time and time again, such as with the Troubadours or any of the scenes with Fringilla. I honestly just hated that storyline and takes away a lot of the good the show did. For example, I was very excited when the Emir scene played from the first episode. He has a great redemption arc in the books, and I mentioned before that I love that sort of thing. But then he loses a lot of what makes his character so complicated because he's less serious and everyone behaves less formally around him. In the books, every encounter he has with someone is so tense because everyone is so afraid of him, and he has this extremely commanding and terrifying presence. But in the show, he's a lot less serious and he's a lot softer. Same thing happens to Yennefer, by the way, where in season 1 I didn't mind the character changes as they were just minor and she was more or less book accurate then, and the second season I have a whole rant about her in my previous video for being so far from what she actually is. In this season she just lacks that boss attitude that makes her so great in the books. It was hard for me to watch her grovel and be frail. I keep wishing and I keep being disappointed by the fact that they lose so much of what makes characters great in this show. Perhaps they're trying to tell a different story and they're building up to her being more powerful later on and possibly at the end of the season. Ciri as well was kind of confusing for me. She's supposed to be something like 14 here, and I don't know if you know many teenagers, but they're irresponsible, and Ciri seems to already have the whole world on her shoulders. She has these grand ambitions of saving the world, and she already wants to fulfill her destiny. This portrayal of teenagers literally only happens in teen dramas or anime or anything like that. By contrast, in the books, she's more realistic for someone her own age. She just wants to chill and have a normal life, and she more or less grows up and matures into fulfilling her destiny. And of course they could be trying to tell their own story with Ciri being mature from the start, and it could be because the actress's age is quite more advanced than what you would expect, but this version of Ciri has me a bit worried because the rat storyline later on really relies on her being sort of younger and immature, and they already seem to be introducing Leo Bonhart in the show, so I guess a different version of Ciri is likely. It also felt quite cheap and low budget at times. For example, why didn't they film this scene outside? I seriously doubt they didn't have the budget to go find a field for the actresses to hold hands for a slight moment while they played footage from season 1. What was the point of using green screen, and why did they use such bad green screen? The CGI has been pretty bad since season 1 and it really hasn't gotten any better. The monsters in this season were just really lacking any kind of realism. The costumes as well just has not really improved much since the ballsack armor of season 1, and again it just feels cheap in the literal sense this time. The acting as well was really hit or miss, especially with the non-main cast characters. The sorceresses, besides Philippa and Tissaia, had some particularly bad acting. Fringilla especially was just hard to watch. Again, all these characters just feel like adults playing a role in a teen drama. Maybe that's what they're going for and they're trying to spin this as a coming of age story for Ciri, but that would just be a massive waste and I hope that's not true. Even for all the good moments, such as the coup of Thanedd, which is done actually quite well in my opinion, they still have these very cliche, generic, cheesy, and whatever else synonyms you can think of that overall express the fact that they're cheapening the plot. I don't know if you noticed the music in the background of the Ball of Aretuza. Hope you caught on that song was a clever little way for the writers to let you know that there's something nefarious going on, and they only repeated the line around 2 to 3 dozen times, so you might have missed it. For example, if you're watching the show on mute and had your screen turned off. But of course they're trying to very subtly hint at the fact that Stregobor is a red herring and there's a conspiracy unfolding. Sarcasm aside, every time that soundbite was played it just cheapened my experience of an otherwise really good episode. I didn't really mind any of the changes they made to the coup of Thanedd. They kept all the important bits, and the main change, not counting the slight things they removed to save time, was the whole subplot with Istredd and Triss and the whole missing half-elf girl's conspiracy. I'm not yet convinced that this plotline is needed. So far it just seems like filler, and I don't really understand why they added it in the show, what it adds to the plot, and why not just keep the original false Ciri plot and the original conspiracy of the coup of Thanedd. But of course this all comes with a massive caveat that we've yet to see the actual coup. We just saw the ball, and so we really have to wait for the payoff before we jump to any conclusions, and for that we have to wait until part 2. The last thing I want to mention is the plot itself. While it is better than anything we've seen in The Witcher so far, it just feels way too contrived. Nothing really seems to happen organically, and I think the main reason for that is they went so far from the story with season 2, and a lot of this season they just had to get back on track, so they had to jump on plot points rather than let it develop naturally. But even besides that, all the plot points from this particular season are extremely convenient. For example, they need Ciri to be in danger, so she just runs in a labyrinth and gets lost. Geralt could have easily killed Rience in this scene, but just decides not to, so he just breaks his hands and runs away. Triss just conveniently finds the one guy who can explain everything that she's been investigating in the library, and Cahir just finds the one guy who can help him return to Nilfgaard's good graces, and is just conveniently his close personal friend. And just in general, people sort of appear without any explanation, and they are perfectly ready to help them move the plot forward. Such as the druids, who are just conveniently close to Geralt, and they know exactly what to do to help him. Geralt especially seems to be able to travel all over the place despite him not being able to teleport. He's just always in the right place, in the right time, exactly where he needs to be, so the plot makes sense. So again, while this is the best The Witcher has been so far, that's just so sad. Not that there aren't extremely ludicrous plot points or just an absolutely incoherent storyline, all the more minor problems with the show become more apparent. and because almost every scene has some sort of problem, it's just hard to recommend this show. But if you're a fan of the series and maybe you didn't enjoy season 2 quite as much and you quit the show for that, completely justifiably, you can come back and watch season 3 and it will defeat expectations of a complete shitstorm that you had, or at least that was my expectations, and they definitely did exceed them. I expected shit and I got something rather mid.